This is being webcast, so if there are any francophones in the room, libre à vous de poser des questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. So I guess we'll go with gentleman over here first.
Yeah, apologies. I was just going to say I'll be relatively close to you, so Reuters are on the phone, and I'm asking a couple of questions first on behalf of Reuters. If I can ask, GDP came in stronger than expected in February. Does that give you more confidence, more confidence to raise the rates sooner rather than later?
Well, we don't normally offer any running commentary on the data as they show up. It's only been a short time since our last decision and lots of data to come in before our next one. So I'll just say that the data this morning were encouraging. That's always better to have a positive data point than one that's off-putting. But we'll wait till May 30th to summarize the data we've received since our last decision.
In the Q&A session just now, you referred to wage outlook being relatively good over the last few months in terms of wages. Can higher wages ease the burden of indebted Canadians, do you think?
Well, that's absolutely the case, that income growth is key to improving financial stability over time. That's always been the center of our analysis. That as the economy strengthens, you actually become, the debt level becomes increasingly sustainable over time, basically because it's a ratio, right? So the denominator is growing faster than the numerator. And that, of course, is exactly what we would expect to see happening. Credit growth has begun to slow, given higher interest rates and the new mortgage rules. And we expect the economy to continue to grow nicely, especially in nominal terms, right? Not just real terms, but nominal terms. And so that will make those levels of debt more sustainable through time. Yes.
And at what point would higher wages become sort of a bit of a threat to the inflation rate?
Well, that depends on productivity growth. So wages plus productivity growth kind of give you the equation for inflation. But there's a lot of restraints lying around inflation. You know that many countries have been seeing their inflation rate underperforming their expectations, perhaps due to global factors such as competition, perhaps due to digitalization. These things are not empirically proved yet, but they're narratives that make a certain amount of sense. But for us, what is key is that we've laid out just a short time ago our latest outlook. It is that inflation a year from now will be on 2%, and wages continue to accelerate are part of that outlook.
Last question from me, just quickly on behalf of Reuters. What do you expect to see from business investment if and when, or as and when NAFTA is resolved?
I'm sorry, what do I expect to see?
From business investment.
Well, you know, our business investment forecast is laid out there in the monetary policy report. It's less than what our models predict because of what companies tell us, that they're either delaying decisions on investments or choosing to move investments somewhere else in order to deal with the uncertainty that they're facing. If NAFTA gets resolved, then I would expect sentiment to improve because many people are talking to us about this uncertainty. That's, of course, a step removed from actual decision making. So we would need to wait and see how the data turned out for investment before it had any impact on our actual outlook for inflation.
Do we have another question? Sorry, did you have a question? No?
I guess, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm Cindy Cohen with Revenue Services. I was just wondering, I guess, given the sort of the range of precarious work now and the competitive job market, and you know, a future of, I guess, rising interest rates, at least down the line, and the high cost of housing. So how do you see millennials and their ability to sort of become homeowners, and how do you view the future of home ownership for people who are younger and, you know,
Right. Well, as I said in my speech, home ownership remains a core aspiration for young Canadians, and I mean, I certainly I'm older, but young enough to remember in the early '80s wondering if I was ever going to be able to afford a house because interest rates were so high at the time. You know, sort of in the 16–18% kind of zone. And in the end, it turned out fine. And I think that with our eye on the long term, we should expect the same here. That we shouldn't forget what we've been through, which has been a very traumatic experience for the world economy. And even though our economy was spared the worst of that because we had a stronger financial system, we still bore quite a shock in 2008 to 10. And then, of course, that was compounded by the collapse of oil prices later. Those have given rise to really significant adjustments, long-term adjustments in our economy. And it's been a struggle for a large share of young folks to break in to the system. But we're confident that as this expansion matures, we're going to get more of that reentry into the workforce from those folks, and the economy will continue to build capacity, and so they'll have as good a chance as anybody has had to build that future. We just need the labor market to become steadily healthier through time, and that's exactly what we're expecting to see.
So I guess, given what you just said, eventually they'll be able to break into the housing market. Do you have an idea of when that might be, when things might turn up, like rise?
Well, I think things have turned up nicely for the last couple of years and really come to fruit in the past 12 months, where we've converged on pretty well the country's operating potential. Now we reach the stage where those folks who have not been as attached to the workforce will find it more advantageous to re-enter the workforce. So we're at that, I call that the sweet spot or the sweet phase of the cycle. And as we've seen in the United States over the past 2 years, it's been in that phase. 2 years ago it was operating close to potential. It's grown strongly for 2 more years without causing inflation. So that's what I mean by a sweet phase. So that's where you build more capacity, and we're just entering that now. So that's, I think, the sort of thing that can last. It depends on how the economy operates, what the structural impediments might be. But I'm optimistic about it, and I think that young people are faced not just with that, but with a retiring workforce. So I think that that combination is bound to be a positive one.
Do any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
So now, not on behalf of Reuters, now on behalf of me locally, Cabin Radio. The Conference Board of Canada produces, of course, regular economic outlooks, including specifically for the Northwest Territories. The most recent one was relatively grim reading for the Northwest Territories in terms of its long-term economic outlook. I wanted to ask you, generally, how much attention do you pay to the Conference Boards of Canada outlooks when you're considering your own economic outlook?
Well, I often see it, but I mean, I have my own very professional staff who you know, would look at that, and of course on their own sources, as well as an extensive team on the ground in the regions, which is a decided advantage when it comes to forecasting. And so when we have people in Western Canada who visit up here frequently, and so throughout the country, and they're always talking to companies. They're the ones that do the interviews, that create our BOSS survey, which is quarterly. And so there are companies in the regions that feed into that, and so they're weighted across sectors and geographically. So that, along with the kinds of on-the-ground meetings that the executive team does themselves, roundtables with actual business leaders, is a very valuable source of input into that, which I think gives us a very strong perspective on it. And so Anyway, to answer your question, is we have our own outlook for such things, and I rely on them.
Looking at that outlook, I appreciate you might not be word for word on the Northwest Territories economic outlook right now, but how do you assess that outlook? Can you give me any assessment of that?
So I acknowledge that people who you ask are a little bit on the pessimistic side just now. It's primarily because of the outlook for the mining sector. That's not surprising. It's a very cyclical kind of sector, and it relies on big, once-in-a-while decisions around investments, whether they drive the expansion or not. And so when you go through a bit of a dry period and nothing new is happening, then people are bound to get pessimistic. And then, of course, it just takes one important decision to happen, and then people turn that attitude around. So it's really not for me to say like where companies may be exploring and thinking about investments that we haven't, that aren't entering people's forecasts as yet. But those are the kinds of things which typically drive an economy like this one. And so for us, it's more of an analysis of what are the stresses that are coming globally through the mining sector, and that would be connected to that, what are currency markets doing and so on. So we would be analyzing the mining sector from that point of view and knowing how that would impact this region. And so for that, I think that the world economy is in the best shape it's been in for a decade or longer. And, in some sense, that just means it's likely to calm down into a steady space until something goes wrong. And so no one really is predicting anything going wrong. We rarely do. But that means at least the backdrop remains a positive one for that business. And I think probably the best growth business is the tourism business. And that's something that Canada has a unique offering. And in regions such as this one, it's my first visit, and I've really liked it. So I know that I'll be back as a tourist. So that's the kind of thing which I think, it doesn't get as much hard analysis as like a mining sector does, right? But it deserves it because those folks come and they spend money and they enjoy themselves, and their friends come.
A couple more quick questions, if that's all right. What brings you to Yellowknife? Why did you decide to come now?
Well, I only do 6 or 7 public speeches a year, but one of the privileges that comes with the position is I get to speak more or less wherever I want, but we try to spread it geographically around the country, and I just wanted to come here.
Yes, you really should have come when the Northern Lights were up. I mean, you've missed it by about a month, but it's okay.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm going to set my alarm again tonight, because last night I didn't see any, but I'm going to try again tonight, so why don't you keep your fingers crossed for me.
I will do. And my last question is, obviously we're a small territory economically, really in the grand scheme of things, but leaders here believe that with significant investment they could make a significant contribution in return. I just wondered how much the Northwest Territories, the territories in general, how much of a role they play in your day-to-day thinking, appreciating that they are still quite small economically.
Yeah, well, no individual region in Canada figures into our day-to-day thinking. We're strictly at the macro level for the Canadian statistics as a whole. But often the case that understanding the texture of the dynamics of what's going on, like a number is just a number, but understanding why it's moving might require a bit more beneath the surface analysis, and what's happening in a certain region then figures into that analysis. So it's constructing a more colorful narrative around a bunch of numbers, which is really what's going on. It'd be rare for something in an individual region to affect the macro picture sufficiently that it's driving it. And that's, of course, as a central bank, we only have one interest rate. It's for the entire country, one analysis, and so the interest is more in understanding it. And at the other side of it, it's important that folks everywhere understand us. So that's why I think it's helpful to come and meet with business leaders face to face and talk to them as we did today.
Do you have any other engagements while you're here?
I do.
Okay. You can elaborate on?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. That concludes the press conference then for today. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks everybody.